am, okay. I'll wait till Scott gets back.
Yeah.
Hi,
So,
Steve.
Hey, Ron.
Late, but my when I went on the Zoom, it said they had to install the updates.
When you went on what?
Zoom, when I went on to the Zoom invite, my Zoom thing said, well, wait a few minutes, we have to update your Zoom. So I
right here,
had to wait to get updated.
here's Scott.
I see.
I don't have a story, so we only got 3. So whoever wants.
Well, let me tell you this. So we'll probably be finished before 6, but Scott has to take the iPad at some point. So I'm going to switch to being on the phone when that happens.
Okay.
And so if I could go first or second, just so, but well, I think on the phone I'll be able to see all of you since there's just 3 of you.
Yeah.
So that doesn't matter. But I don't know exactly what point. But this is one of those strange things where he's got to use it tonight and I do too.
Well,
Okay, well, why don't you go first?
yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm looking at some notes here. All right. Well, I was inspired by your story the last time, Ron, about books in your life. And I got to thinking about 3 books that I read by the time that I was 19 that had an emotional impact on me. And I'd never thought of them like that before. And they're really the only ones that I remember during that time that had such an impact. And the first one is called Marty Markham, and it was written by Lawrence Edward Watkin. And Marty Markham is this kid whose parents are deceased, and he's being raised by his grandmother, who's very, very wealthy. And she sends him to a dude ranch summer camp for the summer. And he arrives with his manservant. And he is certainly the only kid there with a manservant. And he manages to say and do things that further alienate him from the other boys. And so he's somewhat of he is an outsider. And there's another kid who is somewhat of an outsider, and his name is Spin. And Spin is from an inner city, and he is there on scholarship. But he's sort of a boy's boy, you know, and so he's well liked by the other guys, actually. And he and Marty get into arguments and, you know, don't get along, and things happen until finally they have a fight. They actually fight each other physically, and Marty holds on, and from then on they become best friends, and then they have adventures, you know, out west riding horses, and, you know, and so forth.
Wow.
So each of these 3 books I read at a later time. So it's just coincidental that happened. So I reread Marty through the miracle of the internet. I was able to get a used copy of Marty Markham, and this was about maybe 15 or 20 years ago. And I reread it. And what I realized was that I identified with Marty Markham. And it wasn't because he was wealthy, because my family was not in any way wealthy. We had a lot of love in the house, but not a lot of money. But what I identified with was that he was an outsider, and he struggled to be one of the guys. That's the first time I know of ever identifying with a character in a book. And I wanted to be like Spin. And short of that, I wanted to be his friend. And Marty Markham got that. That's what they achieved. And so it was very meaningful to me in that way. And I was 11. I was 11 when I read this book. So the next book I read when I was probably 16 or 17. I was in high school. It was not assigned reading. I don't know how I came upon this book, but it was Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. Mm-hmm. And so it takes place in the 20s. And so I'm reading about these American and British expatriates who live in or hang out in France, and they go to Spain, to Pamplona, to the Bull Run, and they're bullfighters. And You know, they seem to have money, though none of them really work, and they seem sophisticated and urbane, and you know, they have affairs. And when they order wine in restaurants, Hemingway tells you what wine they ordered, and that seems very exotic to me, although it had absolutely no meaning to me. And I knew that the main character, Jake, had injuries from World War One, but I didn't know what those injuries were. And I knew he and other male characters were in love with this lady Brett. And but she seemed to care a lot about Jake, but she was not in love with him. I've got a delivery person who's delivering, and she's angry, and she's on the phone.
Oh,
I think she's getting back in the truck, and she's leaving now. So if you heard that. So all this seemed, you know, really, you know, oh, I don't know, you know, just really a wonderful. I didn't know anybody who lived like that. You know, it was just kind of, and, you know, they drank, and sometimes they drank too much, and there were fights and so forth. But, you know, even their troubles had a sort of an allure about them, you know, a loveliness, you know, the allure of addiction sort of a thing. So then, probably in my late 20s, early 30s, I reread the book. And by that point, I knew what the word impotent meant. And Hemingway says one time in the book that Jake is impotent as a result of his injuries in World War One. Oh my gosh. So I obviously did not look up the book the first time that I read that word, the first time that I read it. And now I understand why Lady Brett is not interested in him romantically. But the people seem decadent and entitled and self-absorbed. There's no compassion among them or concern for anybody else. And they did not seem so appealing to me at all. So the third book was assigned in freshman English in college. And it was The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. And so when I read it, when I was 18, Huck Finn, he's about maybe 13 in the novel, and he's running away, and he's with Jim, the runaway slave, and he's been a ward of these two women, and so he's running away from them, and they belong, and Jim belongs to them. He is their slave. And so at this point, Huck is having second thoughts. Like maybe he shouldn't be helping Jim run away. After all, Jim belongs to them, and it's a sin to help him escape. And, you know, he'll go to hell if he continues with this. And then he begins to think what a good friend Jim has been to him. And he thinks through the several things, you know, that Jim has done to help him out and take care of him. And he decides, screw it, I'll go to hell. I'm not turning him in. I choose to go to hell. And at 18, when I read that, I started crying. And I remembered that. Then I reread it maybe 12 or 15 years ago. And at the same spot, I also cried. But then I had more insight as to why I was crying. And I realized why I was crying. And it was that when I was about Huck's age, when I was 13, I was into puberty, and I was struggling with sexuality as well as homosexuality. And I was thinking that as I had read, maybe this homosexuality was a phase and it would pass. But in the meantime, I'm committing these sins, and these sexual sins that were new to me and were very pleasurable. And I couldn't take communion because you have to be in a state of grace. And I was struggling, staying in a state of grace. And I decided at 13, I'm going to struggle my whole life. First of all, I got to get until I'm about 22 or 23. Maybe I could get married, and then I could have sex within the marriage. But what if I still have these homosexual feelings? So I'm thinking, I'm going to struggle my whole life with this, and I'm going to end up failing, and I'm going to go to hell anyway. And I choose to go to hell now. I'm going to make that decision. So I pretended to be a Catholic. I just went to communion without going to confession, without being in the state of grace, which itself is a mortal sin and will send you to hell, right? So it was like compounded. And then when I was 18 and I read Huck Finn, what I knew by the time that I was 18 was it wasn't going to go away. Those homosexual feelings were never going to go away. And I had lost my faith. I wasn't a believer anymore. I didn't believe all that. So that's 20 years ago when I reread it. Wow. That's why I cried when I was 18. I made the same decision that Huck did. So those are three books that I read by the time I was 18 that had a big impact on my life. Thank you.
Wow. Love it.
That was nice.
It was. And beyond the fun of hearing the books that appeal to you, it's great to see how, you know, they were seriously a part of the fabric that kind of made you understand it all too. Although I remember reading a couple of Hemingways, and it all does have a kind of glow. It's a lot like The Great Gatsby. It's all just sort of this bright, and what all these people, and who are they doing? They're so clever, and and you, until you've had a little experience with, you don't really understand who they are. I didn't understand at all who they were, because I just understood this was a world that I had no idea about, and that was that. And but it does seem quite different in retrospect now.
Well, I went through a period where I was reading one book by Hemingway every year, and I came to realize that his best known books are his best books. There's a reason why. And then a few years ago, I was going to listen to a book of his short stories, and it was like, you got to be kidding me. This honor shit, and this guy's totally dishonored for the rest of his life because he shot a wild animal incorrectly in a dishonorable way, and now he's got gangrene and he's going to die. And it was like, and they all died. And this sense of honor that means absolutely nothing. I mean, it was like, you got to be kidding me. I didn't finish it. I read about 3 or 4 of them and just stopped.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, we came across The Duelist recently. It's a film about dueling, and Harvey Keitel is in it, and he's always one of my, I gravitate to what he does. So and the other person is Kung Fu's brother, the younger brother, and he's a very interesting actor too. So I was attracted to this, but it's all about the honor of the honor that you hold as a soldier and how you can besmirch it in various ways. And if you don't buy into that premise, you're kind of lost in the rest of the show. So,
Ron, we can't hear you.
Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Ron. There you go.
Sorry, I was pressing the wrong button. Scott, yeah, I'm familiar with that movie. I really enjoyed that movie. That was, it was all about honor. It was kind of went to a surreal ending because they were just so entrapped in this duel, but that was very good. And Steve, the 2 of the books you chose are like 2 of my all-time favorite books. I mean, Huckleberry Finn, and I'm going to read it again. You inspired me to. It's time I read that again, because I consider it one of the best American books ever, written. And And I think I need to read it again to figure out, to be able to articulate how I feel.
Yeah, I understand, and I have certainly read things. Let me just say this about Hemingway, that I read things that I really liked. There's an aspect of his style that I like a lot, But here's the interesting thing about Hemingway about Huck Finn. The last maybe third of the book is terrible, and it is a humor that does not translate to our modern times. When Tom Sawyer shows up, it goes downhill really quickly, and Huck has an innocence about him all the way through that's just delightful. There's a passage in it, and actually, one time you guys had at a culture club thing, Pam and Ron. I think we were to bring a poem actually that had meaning for us, and actually I brought a part of a chapter from Huck Finn, and it's a heavy part of the book, and he sneaks into a circus, and he watches the circus. And Twain is just a master, because Huck Finn he thinks it's all spontaneous. He doesn't realize that it's all carefully rehearsed, and he's thoroughly entertained by it. And so Huck has this innocence, and yet Mark Twain shows us, I don't know how he does it, he shows what's going on, but Huck is oblivious to it. And then he sneaks into the circus under the curtain. I think the pollen is getting to me. And then he sneaks out again under the tent,
Wow.
and gets back to the serious stuff. But it's just a delightful interlude there.
Wow.
But I'd love to hear your responses. It's been a while. Maybe I should read it again. Ron,
Well, it's interesting to me that you read it at different ages and had different feelings about it. That was really interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Reading the Hemingway book. It had an important, because I wanted to be a writer, always wanted to be a writer. It was shocked that somebody could write in such a pared down way and still get an emotional response from the reader. So that book was very important to me. And I have been a Hemingway aficionado for so many years. But then maybe last year, I read To Have and to Have Not. And not one of his best books, although I liked the movie that they made of it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
A better movie than book,
Interesting. I've read the book, but I don't remember it so much.
Yeah. And one of the things then, he used the term nigger. And I think, didn't Mark Twain use the term nigger too?
Oh, it's a big criticism.
Yeah.
But it was the term then.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I know that book by Hemingway got a lot of criticism for that. And I feel they get a pass, you can this shows you that we're more conscious of these things, but I think it shouldn't stop us from enjoying those books, and created in that time period.
And altering them, that seems like a terrible idea right now.
Yeah, sacrilege.
Yeah, in many respects, I just don't care for that. Speaking of a culture club, I saw Jackie Prochetta yesterday.
Oh,
You did? Where?
We were at a party for Client Raiser, which is an arts company that helps, by its name, helps you get more clients, hopefully. And they had a party down at 9th and V Street, and Jackie was there, and we had a nice chat, and we all mentioned you all, and I talked about
wonderful
getting to meet with you this week. So
yeah,
you remember.
Steve, I remember you when you gave that little recital of Huck Finn. It was at our next door neighbor's house.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Okay.
Yeah, I remember that. Okay, well, I guess we better move on. If Carla's watching this, she inspired this presentation.
Good.
She has this Honda automobile that if it's not driven on a regular basis, for some reason, the battery goes dead. Which, you know, in our day and age, I've never heard of such a thing, you know, and so she has to take it periodically back to the dealer and then they say it's okay. She's had a lot of trouble with it. So it inspired me to talk about the lemons I have known in automobiles. And the first lemon was, and this was a car that I talked my mother into getting. It was circa 1963, and I was big on European cars, you know, and I said, the Hondas are the best cars being made. You know, you buy these American cars and, you know, they break apart after a year, but the Japanese have figured out how to keep a car from, you know, anyway. And so I convinced her to buy a Honda Accord, and we had to go 30 miles out of Baltimore to find a dealer that specialized in Volkswagens, I mean, Hondas. And so anyway, bought the car, and then about a month after, and the month after she had the car, we noticed that the upholstery, which was this nice, soft, wonderful white gray, was staining. It was fading. You know, it's a month. So I took it back to the dealer, and I said, you know, oh, we'll replace it. We'll replace it. So at great cost, they had to reupholster the whole car. And then I gave it back, brought it back to my mother, all the, you know, 30 miles back and forth. And in another month, the same thing happened. It stained again. So I take it back, and I'm sitting with this dealer, and I said, you know, my mother smokes a lot. And I think my theory is that the cigarette smoke is interacting with the upholstery and then just, you know, changing the dynamics of the upholstery. And the guy looked at me and he laughed. He said, it would take, even if you had a dozen Polish officers in that car smoking all day, it couldn't possibly do that to them. So we got it reupholstered, and I've lost track. Was this the first? No, this is the second time. Anyway, it happened again. I took it 3 times. We had it reupholstered, and I said, "Look, why don't you just give me the money and I'll get it reupholstered in a different fabric?" Oh no, they couldn't do it. So after 3 times of changing it, of course, it did it again. And by then I had been worn out. I mean, they had won. I mean, they didn't want to acknowledge that cigarette smoke could possibly, you know, affect the upholstery. I mean, that might be bad for business. So anyway, that was a lemon in that regard. And my second lemon was the first car I had ever owned. It was a 1965 Le Mans Pontiac, my first car that I bought, you know, on credit. And it was maroon with a black vinyl top. And it was, you know, and I remember driving for the first time and picking up my girlfriend. She was so excited, and she jumped in the car. We're going down Broning Highway, and all of a sudden I put my foot on the brake, and there's no brake. it just goes right to the bottom, and I'm going down. Somehow, miraculously, I got across an intersection without running into somebody, and it ran out of steam and stopped. And then I had to take it back and get the brakes repaired. And then I had this nice vinyl top that was so super cool. But then after a year, what people discovered who bought those cars with black vinyl tops is they started to peel. You know, it really had this ugly peeling, and the cars became like, they looked like junkers. So that happened to my Pontiac, and that was the second lemon. And the third lemon was an Opel Kadett. It was yellow, and you know, and it was like a super different kind of car, and it was cheap. I got it used, and I bought it, and discovered every time it rained, the trunk would fill up with water. I mean, a lot of water. So, you know, and I would take it back to the dealer, and then they would try to seal it up. Anyway, you can imagine. So after 2 or 3 times, that was going to be a chronic problem. Every time it rained, my trunk was going to fill up with water. So that was the Opel Kadett. But to try to end this negativity on a positive note, the car that I really fell in love with was the Volkswagen Beetle. And how that came to be, I was in Europe and I teamed up with a friend from Germany, Ingo, and we had decided that we were going to go up to Zermatt and spend the winter there, you know, working at the ski resort. So he said, but we need a car to get there. And so we were in Germany at the time, said, we'll get the cheapest car we can get, you know, like, and so he found this dealer, and we got a Volkswagen Beetle for $200, you know, and all we wanted to do was get up there, you know. So we got up the mountains with it, and in Zermatt, you cannot have a car in Zermatt. So we had to leave it down at a lower station where cars were allowed in a parking lot. And we had to keep it there like for 3 months, you know. And he said, well, you know, the battery's probably going to go dead. When Carla hears this, she's going to turn. So he said, I'm going to put a blanket on the engine. So after 3 months, we come down, it's thawed out, take the blanket off, and we don't expect this car to go. And it starts right up like a charm. So we ended up just using the car. I mean, we just thought we were as a junker. And that car ended up, because we would hook up and travel somewhere, and then we would split up. He would take the car, I would take the car. And then that car it traveled all over Europe. And finally, and the last place it ended up was Ireland. I mean, I had the car, I was using it in London, and it just wouldn't give up. And it was very convenient. So we took it over to Ireland and drove it all around there. And before I left to come back, that's where I came back to the States from Ireland. I mean, I sold the car for more than I paid for it to somebody else.
Wow.
So they're my stories about cars.
A gift. That's a great
One
gift.
more quick thing. Technology that lasts, you know, and now, I mean, I wouldn't buy, if you gave me a Beetle, I don't know if I would want it anymore. It went through so many different changes, and they lied about certain things. Anyway, that's another story. But I'm going to show you something in a minute that I've owned for over close to 50 years. And it runs on battery. And I've only had to change the battery twice in 50 years. And this is what it is. It's a little clock made in Japan by Braun. And this has been with me everywhere. It's perfect for me, you know, and it has a little light in night when you want to look at the time, or when it acts as a flashlight. And I hope they put it next to me in my coffin.
Okay, I'll remember
Wow.
So
that.
that's
Love
my
it.
story.
Love it.
All right. Very good. Well, I'm about to switch to the phone, but the funniest thing to me is I had no idea that Polish officers are known for smoking a lot.
Right. I didn't either. My mother was Polish.
Okay, Pam, can you let me in? I know. Can you let me in, Pam?
Oh, yeah,
Okay, bye, y'all.
All right.
he's coming back.
Well, it's funny you should say the Polish officers too, because I think were the duelists also, or were they Polish, or there was some?
I think so, or at least
Yeah.
one of them was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another.
Yeah. And who was the other actor with Harvey Keitel? What was his-
Keith Carradine.
Yeah, Keith Carradine.
Yeah, not John Carradine or the
Yeah.
grasshopper guy, but
He
Keith.
played in a lot of good movies back then, and then all of
Yeah.
a sudden he disappeared.
Yeah, he said that was one of his best. And I think it was
Yeah, I
probably
like.
the director.
Yeah, and that was one of the first ones directed by whose name I can't remember now. Scott. I want to say.
Oh, Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott. Yeah. Who apparently got into the dueling thing in a big way. I mean, he learns. Apparently, he's a great studier of whatever he does. Is it my turn? Shall I
Yes.
roll in here? So this is a compilation of a couple of ideas. One was I wanted to do the books, but this week has been a lot about food, and it's actually been a week of losing a few friends. And this is and since we mentioned lemons, there's a kind of theme running through this. But this is, I probably might call this Ghosts in the Kitchen, something like that. Anyway, I was taught by my mother so that she could go back to work, taught how to cook. My father taught my mother how to cook because she did not really know how to cook much more than corned beef and cabbage from her mother and her father. And my grandmother on my father's side taught my father to cook because she thought it was a necessary thing, and she also wanted to go back to work. So essentially, I've been taught by my great-grandmother how to cook. She loved lemons, and she inspired my father to try many different things, and to having grown up in part of Chicago where he was able to meet the Poles and they were called the Lugans, the Lithuanians and the Italians and so on. He had a lot of great feeling for food. You know, he had great love for food. So that when he was in the kitchen, he was a bit of an experimenter, if you will, and also a great appreciation for lots of different kinds of food. So ultimately, this story is about my father and sourdough, the process of using sourdough starter to make things. But before we get there, I'd like to mention a couple of people, and then this is part of the remembrance of the ghosts in the kitchen, because when I cook fish, I frequently think of my friend Chris Patton, who's no longer with us. And Chris, you know, he had a particular way of doing, especially on the grill. Lemon was always a part of the recipe. We had something called talisman tea, he and I, when we were performing, and it had lemon in tea and honey, so on. The friend who just died last night, his name is Richard Averbush, and Richard cooked spinach, and lemon was a part of this recipe. You know, you sauteed it, and lemon was a big part of it, and da-da-da-da-da. Or we're back to my father. And my father, if he came home for lunch, his idea of a good lunch was taking mushrooms, fresh mushrooms, and breading them, frying them up, and squeezing lemon on top. That was his idea of a great lunch. And so you kind of get a sense that maybe it was the sour, that kind of slight tang, part of the palate that he had and part of the things he loved. somewhere in the course of being a doctor and a patient and having patients in Colorado, he was given some sourdough starter. You know, sourdough starter is quirky. Also, you have to feed it. If you want to use it, you have to keep it alive. So almost every week you have to, you take out the starter that you took off from the last time you did this, you feed it equal parts water and flour, and the starter grows up, you know, does its rising thing, and then you take out a cup or a cup and a half and put it into a jar, and you keep that in the refrigerator, and you use the bulk of what you have left, which you can either let rise again or do something else. Well, my dad was actually quite good at making pancakes with sourdough starter, and I have had a taste for them of late. And you know, you don't go into a restaurant and get sourdough pancakes. You get, you know, or at least you don't think you do. So as it happened, one of our apartment friends here, Amanda is a baker, and she said, well, I have some sourdough starter if you'd like to, you know, I'll give you some if you'd like to try something with it. So recently I got some sourdough starter, and I've been feeding it and trying up recipes, and I tried to make bread one time, and it was a serious disaster because it was like a brick. There was rising, and we had it in for 12 hours and all sorts of stuff. Terrible. Another recipe, I tried to make English muffins, which is a good thing to do with sourdough starter. Terrible. Just a disaster. Pretty much inedible. I did find I could make some crackers, and Barry liked these crackers, and I thought, well, okay, let's stick with simpler things. And I've kept thinking, oh, I tried to make pancakes. The pancakes were ghastly. They were too thick. They were all these things. Everything was wrong. Everything I did was wrong with the pancake, pretty much. Until I said to myself, you know, I love Swedish pancakes. And I know how to make Swedish pancakes. And I'm betting if I use the sourdough recipe to make Swedish pancakes, they'll actually come out pretty good. So I did. And one of the things I put in my Swedish pancake recipe is a little lemon zest. And I made them, and Barry, who's a serious lover of blintzes, convinced me that I could make some blintzes with them, and I've done that. And I'm pretty happy with myself with as far as this goes. That is the way we talk productively about sourdough starter, but I want to go back to the fact that you have to feed it. And my father, he wanted to go camping in a camper, and he developed a camper, and we went camping in a camper, and his idea was to bring some of the starter along and make sourdough pancakes on our Sunday after sleeping out in the, you know, in the wilds. So before he went to bed, he fed the starter, and he put it with him in his sleeping bag, thinking it would keep it warm, which you have to do, and that it would rise just enough so that he would be fine the next day. Well, as you might imagine, in the middle of the night, he found himself like the movie Charlie. I don't know if you saw the film Charlie with Cliff Robertson, with I mean, this dough is everywhere, and not such a pleasant time, but a lot of fun to watch. And there you have it, a few memories about sourdough, and a way of talking about some of my friends, both my father and these two friends of mine who I'm fondly think of.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Makes me want to have sourdough pancakes.
Well, if you were here, I'd whip you up some.
Well, I could be there.
It's all right. Come on over. I wish I could give you some of the potato soup that we're supposed to cook too, but I haven't done that in a while.
Wow.
So you like to bake?
I like to bake. I in in high school and in that period I used baking to kind of get away from it all in some respects, and I would make I was not eating sugar. I was not very strict diet for myself, and I tried rice bread and rice flour and spelt flour and all kinds of different flours when I made bread. But my best bread was whole wheat, and a lot of fun to do it. I've never really made a good sourdough yet, so that's a kind of the holy grail for me.
Mm.
Hmm.
But
I know we know a woman who makes the best sourdough. Oh, it's so good. It's so light with some butter on it, toasted lightly with butter. It's just fantastic. And I thought about, doing it, but I'm already doing, the Lebanese yogurt called Laban, and that you don't feed it, but you have to keep it and reuse it and, use it as starter and so forth. And I'm not really a baker. I'm not someone who does exact cooking.
yeah, that's one of the things you
Baking
have to be
requires
careful
that.
about. Yeah.
Yeah. Scott is more of a baker, and he thought about it and he kept it, and then he didn't keep up with it.
Well,
So you got to be devoted to it.
Yeah.
yeah, it's fun and it's curious. It's nice to have around. And I've been, of course, as you go through these things, you research things. And one of the people said, most of the time it's a disaster at first because your kitchen isn't ready, which she is implying that you don't have the yeast floating around in your kitchen that will make this a successful bread. And she says use it for a time, and the yeast she said, if you buy a starter from San Francisco that's supposedly from the original sourdough prospectors, where it's very famous from, and buy that very expensive starter, which they claim is the starter from those guys, it will be a different starter by the time you've used it for maybe a month and a half, because you're dealing with the natural yeast that's in the air and in your kitchen. As far as it's raising, as it rises, it feeds off that and incorporates that into the mixture. So I'm learning about crazy
Okay.
things like that. Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah,
Isn't it kept in the refrigerator?
yeah. Well, you don't have to if you use it almost every day, but I don't. So I feed it about once a week, and then I try to make something with that. And that's where the pancakes came in, and I'm so pleased about that. So I'm trying to figure out other things that I can create. Maybe pizza dough, who knows?
What's the difference between Swedish pancakes and regular pancakes?
Well, Swedish pancakes are very large and thin, and they're actually, the batter is quite liquid. And what's fun about it is, you take it and you put in a fair amount, and then you use the pan to spread it all around the edges, and it cooks very quickly, fairly quickly. And you can flip it, you can cook both sides. With the other pancake batter, and most often what you do is you pour in a pretty good amount, and it stays in that little circle. And you watch for the bubbles to rise, and then you have to flip it over before it burns. Just a side note, invariably you lose the first pancake, and my sister said, yeah, it should be that way with children too.
Oh my
You lose
God,
the first one.
that's horrific. I don't know.
Her first son was, her first child was a handful, so I think that's where that
That's cute.
came.
Where do crepes fit in this?
Crepes, actually, French crepes, I believe, are probably sourdough, because at
really?
the Black Cat in our previous neighborhood, they made whole wheat crepes, and it did have the texture and the taste of the ones I've been making. So, and crepes can also be savory, besides whole sweet. So,
Yeah.
a nice challenge is to think about, I used to eat or order seafood crepes there, which is lovely because it's savory and the fun taste of the crepe and all that.
Yeah.
So the kitchens, this is, you know, you guys were talking about books last time, and I missed Major Tom's story there, Major Ron's story, but I have been thinking about you guys in the books, and one of the books that I've been inspired by, and I was going to go a whole different way, but Recipes for a Small Planet is a very funky book, but it has come in handy and has taught me some stuff, and I always think about it when I you know, when I make certain recipes. I actually, like my father, I now make a frittata using some of the things I learned in that book. I don't use their particular recipe, but I use some things I learned in it. So
you like to experiment and stuff.
I do, and you know, that's a baker should never really. You got to be really good to experiment as a baker.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The
what I
recipe for,
don't-
sorry.
Which is what I don't enjoy about it, because I am an experimenter with my cooking.
Yeah, I mean,
You know,
one of the ladies who, the woman who helped us actually with all of the contractors that came into our apartment, it was a chef. She's a freelance chef, but she now has kids and all that, and she gave us a recipe for quiche, and I'm really actually quite religious about following her recipe because it's so good that I think I would mess it up if I didn't hang on to that.
yeah.
What is different about it?
It's zucchini, which means, and this is what I'm very surprised about, it has zucchini and mushrooms, but she makes she absolutely insists that you cook the zucchini down. So you cook the zucchini for about 10 minutes and the onions, so that the water is out of it. You know, less water in the zucchini than you would normally have.
Right.
And then she puts that in the bottom of the pie, pie crust, and then pours like 3 eggs over it that have, and then puts cheese and goat's cheese. Was the Gruyere cheese, and
Yeah.
in the process of making the zucchini, you also add fresh basil and fresh thyme and sun-dried tomatoes. So you got a real lovely, interesting. But the bottom of the quiche is a very tasty vegetable. So
Just before I go, I would just say that one time I mistakenly called a man Basil, and his name was Basil.
Oh,
And I think you mistakenly called the herb basil, and it's really basil.
oh, good. Thank you. Well, it's a great thing, and I've got some growing in my kitchen right now.
I do too. All right, you guys, I'm going to say goodbye.
Yeah.
See
Okay.
y'all
Well,
probably in a pretty
I
short
guess it's,
time. Actually.
yeah, I think we'll all just say goodbye, and I hope, Carla, if you see this, we hope you come back soon. We miss you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Wow.
All right.
Good
Bye,
to see
y'all.
everyone.
You too.